This panel has the remit to focus on the future of the disputed territories, both to understand the previous shortcomings from legal and political standpoints, and also the new de facto situation on the ground and the way in which it will affect the statute between Baghdad and Erbil. And we hope through this conference to set a platform on how to move forward in the context of evolving political and security situations. Tensions between the Kurdish Regional Government and Baghdad have ebbed and flowed over the years on issues of power sharing, oil production, and territorial control. Soon after the fall of Mosul in June, the Peshmerga took control of large swaths of the territories, consequently altering the balance of power between Baghdad and Erbil. As the first panel of the Middle East Research Institute Forum on Dialogue and Reconciliation, anybody who has ever been involved in Iraq, whether it's directly or indirectly, will well be familiar with the issues of the disputed territories and the controversies they have generated over the years. From the process of normalization to establishing a census or formulating a question to be agreed upon for a referendum, even determining who can participate in that referendum, not to mention defining what the disputed territories encompass as a geographical area, remain undefined. The objective today is not to rehash the failures of the past, but rather to discuss in a pragmatic manner if there is any possibility of achieving a final statute agreement with all stakeholders, looking at the relevance of Article 140 today, and maybe its potential implementation on the focused area of Kirkuk. We need to address how we can move forward in light of the current situation. Is it possible to find a solution that will be a win-win situation for all the parties involved? How would Kirkuk be singled out as a case if we were to focus on Kirkuk only? Or should we just agree to disagree for now and focus on the security? We are joined today by Mohammed Ihsan, former KRG Minister on the disputed territories. Mohammed, you've been working on these issues for many years, and you've been privy to most legal and political negotiation on the matter, both here and in Baghdad. Joining us as well is the chairman of Kirkuk Provincial Council, Hassan Toran, and also former deputy head of the Iraqi Turkoman Front. You will bring in your wealth of experience from a Turkoman perspective and more focalized on Kirkuk. We will also be joined by Marwan Ali from UNAMI. You have an extensive experience in Iraq, and you've had quite a breadth of experience in trust building and confidence building measures between both KRG and Baghdad. I think you can bring in a wealth of experience and insight from a UN perspective. And Gareth Stansfield, who has also been a regular commentator and advisor on Middle East politics over the last decade, focusing in particular on the political economy of Iraq and the KRG. To all the speakers here, your achievements are too numerous to be summarized in just a few words, but the breadth of your experience will inform the suggestion that you will make today on this panel. What I would like to do is, from your particular areas of expertise, drill down on the different issues affecting the debate of the disputed territories. Dr. Ihsan, I would like to start with you, because you are what I would call a veteran on the issue. And as former chief of KRG's Committee on the Disputed Region, you advocate that the KRG should only lay claim to Kurdish majority areas, an issue that has been deemed quite controversial. I will give you the floor now.
Thank you. I'm glad really to join all gatherings, such wonderful gathering of friends and colleagues and students, and we worked together for a while, and to be back to talk about KRG. By the way, about disputed areas. By the way, I'm still minister in the government. I'm counting a couple of days just to say goodbye to KRG. I think before I start to talk about my experience and what I've been through, or my experience about disputed areas while I was working there, I think I have to share with you a couple of numbers. The size of Iraq today is 437,509 square kilometers. Size of KRG today is 50,328 square kilometers. Size of disputed areas between Baghdad and Erbil is 45,050 kilometers, which means 48% of KRG's land is still disputed between Baghdad and Erbil. Numbers, size of land, it means a lot for dictators, because the main thing for dictators and the policy of Arabization was to enlarge his empire, which exists in his mind. But for us as a Kurd and Turkmen, it was a story of sorrow, pain, demography change, deportation, genocide in general. We agreed after 2005 or after 2003 that we should make out roadmap how to sort out these issues. Through TAL, we have two main articles identifying the roadmap for sorting out the surah and future of 50 square kilometers between Baghdad and Erbil, despite of all the genocide and all the deportation and all these issues. We agreed, which means we agreed to sort out the political issue by a legal means. I think this is the first phenomenon in the Middle East. Always in the Middle East, they are sorting out the political issues either by guns or by neglecting others. And I hope by MERI and such more organizations we can continue doing dialogue and reconciliation, not just with others, even in Kurdistan with among and with each other here too. We agreed with Baghdad to follow a roadmap to go ahead. What has been done so far, Ayad Alawi, as Dr. Ayad's government on 2005, he established a committee to normalize just Kirkuk, which means the committee started at its birth as a failure, as no development ahead. This is why after a year nothing has been achieved, no money has been allocated, nothing has managed to lead that committee. 2006 after that, during Maliki's time, another committee has been established to implement Article 140, to implement that roadmap, to go ahead or to sort out the fate of 45,000 square kilometers between Baghdad and Erbil. We worked hard in that committee. Our job was encouraging people who've been deported forcibly to go back to their roots, people who've been bought like settlers or new settlers to these areas, to encourage them to go back. In addition to that, the people who've been fired from their jobs to be back to their jobs. And the issue of administrative borders between these territories, then prepare a voting list or who has the right to participate in a referendum and in which areas we are going to conduct referendum. I think as a committee we managed and we worked so hard to do that. But at the same time, we were facing millions of trouble from the government themselves. They were doing their best to undermine the situation. They were doing their best to undermine to go ahead. I think most of our colleagues who are here today, they are aware of that story, which means we were moving one step ahead, two steps back, okay? Then, in 2006, Article 20 of his government's plan or his government's program, he identified another 3 dates and he became more accurate. If you look at 25 language to 26 language, you will come across that things are, which means moving ahead. He identified that as by 20, we have to finish normalization. 31st July 2007, we have to finish census, and referendum should be conducted by 15th November 2007. Nothing has been achieved, nothing has been implemented, despite all what we did. Then next government, if you look at the program of 2010, the second term of Maliki, if you look at the language, we're going to find out is this very weak language, and he just bypassed what he's supposed to do about 1940s, how to implementation of it, okay? After 8 years of Maliki, we find out really very little has been achieved, okay? Despite of the hard work, huge amount has been spent, roughly more than, I think billions been spent, more than $1 billion of Article 140. In 2011, they changed the plan totally. Instead of concentrating in disputed area, they enlarged the concept of disputed area in order to cover all Iraq except Kurdistan. We get to the level that roughly about more than 50% of the budget of the committee has been spent on Basra, Nasiriyah, Amman, but not Kurdistan. I have figures and I have numbers, I can share it with you. Then we were working to put pieces together and always telling them if we are not going to do this, it's going to be another theater, another stage for tension between Baghdad and Erbil, and by the end it will end up, it will be porn by all safe. It will be porn for all dirty instinct, not just that be too active there. A huge part of Iraq has been under Daesh today, and based on my knowledge and based on my experience, I think one of the reasons of current situation, of current war with Daesh is not implementing Article 140, because that was the key to get trust from other parties within the country, mainly Kurds, to be a real partner and to work together toward the end of such terrorist groups in Iraq. And if you look at the numbers, how much Iraq spent so far in security, I'm going to make sure. Iraq spent from 2005 until 2013, $177 billion on their security organization, which means Ministry of Defense, Ministry from Waqa'a al-Iraqiyya, not from myself. Okay? Imagine the country can spend $177 billion not managing to keep a security for at least 10% of the line of the land, and having such millions of soldiers, which means there is something wrong. Again, I think even if we managed today to make an end to ISIS by military forces, the issue of disputed area, up with another Daesh, so will appear in this area, because by wrong policies, by wrong implementation, not clear vision for the future, Iraq managed to create these areas to be a pond, unsecure pockets. Neither KRG will manage to keep this security or security of this area, nor Iraq. This is why I think it's time for the current government in Baghdad to think seriously how to implement it. Not implementing 140, it will remain the mother of all other issues. It links to the issue in Baghdad. It links to the issue of security between KRG and Baghdad, and oil, security, and financial issue between Baghdad and Erbil. I hope we can learn from our mistakes. I hope the mistakes of the former regime, I will remain saying the former regime, because in Iraq we get used to former regime, But I think 8 years of Maliki, we should identify that as a former regime and go back to Saddam Hussein's time in order to differentiate both times, both periods together, and get lessons and learn from what we committed during the past 8 years. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
السيدات السادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بداية أنا أشكر مؤسسة الشرق الأوسط لإتاحتها هذه الفرصة لي لأن ألتقي مع حضراتكم وأن أعبر عن رأيي في موضوع يتعلق بالمناطق المتنازع عليها. وقد طلبت أن أركز على ملف كركوك، وكانت كلمتي أو ستكون كلمتي بعنوان نحو رؤية مشتركة لمستقبل كركوك. أنا حسن توران، نائب رئيس الجبهة التركمانية العراقية من سنة 2005 إلى سنة 2011، ثم رئيس مجلس محافظة كركوك من 2011 إلى 2014، والآن مجلس النواب العراقي أحد ممثلي محافظة. للحديث عن كركوك لا بد أن نرجع قليلا إلى الوراء ونتحدث شيء عن التاريخ القريب لهذه المدينة والمحافظة المهمة في العراق. تمتاز كركوك بكونها مجتمع متعدد القوميات والطوائف والأديان، وعاشت هذه القوميات والطوائف والأديان بتآخي وسلام طيلة سنوات، إلا أنه ومع الأسف الشديد بداية مشاكل كركوك كانت مع اكتشاف النفط فيها. عادة النفط في بلدان العالم تكون نعمة لأبناء المنطقة، ولكنها تحولت إلى نقمة كركوك، حيث مارست المتعاقبة في العراق سياسات مجحفة بكركوك. بداية التغيير الديمغرافي، حيث استخدمت عوائل كثيرة من خارج كركوك وكركوك، وكذلك في مراحل لاحقة تم التغيير الديمغرافي بترحيل التركمان والكرد من هذه المحافظة. أيضا النظام البعثي البائد مارس الظلم بأبشع أنواعه ضد هذا، حيث ركز سياسته على تغيير ديمغرافي مقنن باستخدام عوائل من خارج كركوك وإسكانها فيها. ثم تبعته مسألة خطيرة جدا، وهو مسألة الاستيلاء على الأراضي في سلسلة قرارات مجلس قيادة الثورة بدأت عام 1976 ولم تنتهي إلا بعد سقوط النظام في 2003 في عملية ممنهجة وبقرارات مجحفة. تم الاستيلاء على أراضي التركمان والكرد في مركز المدينة وأطرافها بحجة النفع العام، ثم تم توزيع هذه الأراضي على المواطنين من غير التركمان والكرد، واستغلت لأغراض الزراعة أو الانتفاع أو التجارة. وهذه الأراضي لم تحل مشكلتها، والتي سأتي عليها مفصلا لحد هذه اللحظة. كانت العملية أيضا ممنهجة من حيث إضعاف الاقتصادي للتركمان والكرد في محافظة كركوك، حيث حرم هؤلاء المواطنون من التعيين، وحرموا كذلك من تبوء مناصب إدارية، بل وصل الإجحاف بحق التركمان خصوصا حينما كان الدستور المقترح في شهر 8 لسنة 1990 أصلا أنكر وجود قومية باسم القومية التركمانية في العراق. كما زج بكل المناضلين وقادة الرأي التركمان في السجون والمعتقلات، والعجيب أنهم كانوا لا يشملون بأي عفو عندما تصدر قرارات عفو من مجلس قيادة الثورة كان التركمان يستثنون من قرارات العفو. لدينا سجناء كثيرون قضوا 20 سنة بالتمام والكمال في سجون النظام البائد، وهؤلاء لحد الآن مع الأسف الشديد لم تنصفهم الحكومة الجديدة، وحتى طلبنا مرات عديدة أن يحصلوا على قطعة أرض ليبنوا عليها بيتا، مع الأسف الشديد لم تعطى لهم هذه قطعة الأرض. بعد عام 2003 وسقوط النظام البعثي وبداية عهد جديد في العراق، كنا كتركمان نأمل أن تزال هذه المظالم عن كاهلنا وأن نسترد حقوقنا بالكامل. وبالتالي وضعت خارطة حل لهذا الموضوع، موضوع المناطق المتنازع عليها. ورغم تحفظنا نحن كتركمان على هذه المادة والتي هي المادة 140، ولكن المادة 140 هي بالأصل نقل للمادة 58 من قانون إدارة الدولة العراقية المؤقت، والذي ينظر إلى الدستور العراقي اليوم لا يرى فيها تفاصيل المادة 58. المادة 58 هي موجودة في قانون إدارة الدولة العراقية المؤقتة، وخارطة حلها فيها 3 مراحل: التطبيع والإحصاء والاستفتاء. والتطبيع فيه تراتبية، هذه المادة الدستورية التي انتقلت بالمادة 140 فيها تراتبية، لا يمكن الانتقال إلى الإحصاء إلا بعد الانتهاء من التطبيع، ولا يمكن الانتقال إلى الاستفتاء إلا بعد أن ينتهي الإحصاء. هذه 3 مراحل واضحة وصريحة، وأتمنى من الحاضرين أن يلقوا بنظرة عند عودتهم إلى المادة 58 من قانون إدارة الدولة العراقية المؤقتة. كركوك فيها مشاكل كثيرة، وهذه المشاكل لم تحل لحد الآن، لأن بعد سقوط النظام تأسست حكومة محلية مؤقتة في كركوك عندما كان الأمريكان موجودون، ثم أعقبتها انتخابات في سنة 2005 الشهر الواحد، ثم لم تتم فيها انتخابات لحد الآن لعدم وجود توافق بين مكوناتها حول آلية إجراء الانتخابات. الثقة بين المكونات لا زالت غير موجودة بالمعنى المطلوب في محافظة كركوك، وأنا لدي الكثير من التحفظات على سياسة الأحزاب الكردية في هذه المحافظة، حيث أنها من وجهة نظري لم تستطع أن تبني هذه الثقة بين مكونات كركوك، وخاصة مع التركمان الذين تشاركوا بمظالم كثيرة مع الكرد في إذبان النظام البائد، ولكن هذه الخطوات لم تترجم إلى واقع عملي لردم الهوة بين هذين المكونين الرئيسيين في محافظة كركوك. على سبيل المثال، المشكلة الأراضي سن لها قانون باسم قانون النزاعات الملكية كأحد متطلبات التطبيع للمادة 58 أو المادة 140. صدر قانون في سنة 2004 لحل هذه المشكلة. عجز هذا القانون لحل المشكلة، فتم تشريع قانون جديد في سنة 2010 لحل مشكلة النزاعات الملكية. عجز هذا القانون أيضا لحل هذه المشكلة الرئيسية. في سنة 2012 الشهر الواحد صدر قرار من مجلس الوزراء بإلغاء قرارات مجلس قيادة الثورة ومكتب تنظيم الشمال الذي تم الاستيلاء على الأراضي بموجبها، والقانون لا زال حبر على ورق رغم مرور 2 على صدوره من مجلس الوزراء العراقي. وأنا أتحدى هنا كل من يقول أن تركماني واحد أو كردي واحد استطاع إرجاع أرض متر واحد من أراضيه التي تم الاستيلاء عليها منذ عام 1976 ولحد الآن بصورة قانونية. لم يسترجع أي مواطن من مواطني كركوك عن الأراضي التي استولى عليها النظام البائد. فكم سنة أخرى سينتظر هذا المواطن منذ عام 1976 حتى يتحقق حلمه ويزال عنه الظلم ويسترجع هذه الأراضي؟ هناك الكثير من الادعاءات حول التغيير الديمغرافي، ويجب أن نكون هناك صادقين ومنصفين، وأن تشكل لجنة من المكونات الثلاث لإعادة تركيبة كركوك إلى أصلها، لأنه اليوم في كركوك مشاكل كثيرة تستوجب من الجميع الكركوكيين التعاون وصياغة رؤية مشتركة لحل هذه المشاكل العالقة، وإلا إن الخطر سيدهمنا جميعاً ولن ينجو طرف من الأطراف من هذه المخاطر. هناك مشكلة، هو أنه لم نستطع نحن مكونات كركوك الوصول إلى رؤية مشتركة حول مستقبل المحافظة، ولكن أيضا لدينا مصالح مشتركة من العيش المشترك، التاريخ والواقع والمستقبل يدفعنا جميعا إلى التوافق وحل رؤية مشتركة حول مستقبل هذه المحافظة. هذه المحافظة الغنية تستطيع أن تكون وتخلق فرص عمل كثيرة لمكوناتها، ونعمل على تنمية اقتصادية يشترك في جني ثمارها الجميع عبر المصالح المشتركة لتحقيق الرؤية المشتركة. هذه الرؤية المشتركة طريقها أو أحد طرقها هو المصالح المشتركة. في كركوك لم نتفق لحد الآن لحل المشاكل الرئيسية المتعلقة بتوزيع الثروة وبتوزيع السلطة والاعتماد على المعايير الدولية لحقوق الإنسان في التعامل فيما بيننا، وأن نعمل على تكريس سيادة القانون في هذه المحافظة. هذه العناوين تحتاج إلى ملفات وتحتاج إلى حوارات، وأنا أقول لكم من هذا المنبر وبكل صراحة أن بناء الثقة طريقه الحوار، والحوار متوقف أو معدوم بين المكونات الرئيسية وقواها السياسية. جربنا مرارا وتكرارا أن نعمل على إدامة الحوار بين الأحزاب السياسية في كركوك، وبكل صراحة لم ننجح لحد الآن في بناء هذا الحوار. هذا ليس شيء غريب، ولكن هذا واقع، أن الحوار بين مكونات كركوك في هذه الفترة العصيبة الحوار الممنهج مفقود. النقطة الثانية، ماذا نريد من بعضنا البعض؟ هل نريد أن نكون شركاء مع بعضنا البعض أم يكون طرف تبعا لطرف آخر؟ التبعية حاول النظام البائد أن يمارسها في العراق وخسر العراق وخسرنا جميعا، فيجب أن لا نستنسخ تلك العقلية ونؤمن بالشراكة وليس بالتبعية. مفهوم الأقلية والأكثرية مفهوم فاشل إذا كان يعتمد على موضوع الحقوق. نعم، ممكن أن تكون أغلبية سياسية وأقلية سياسية، ولكن موضوع الحقوق والواجبات ليست لها علاقة بالأقلية والأغلبية. الحقوق هي حقوق مكتسبة، فإذا يدعي طرف أن التركمان أقلية في كركوك، يدعي طرف آخر بأن الكرد أقلية في العراق. هذا المفهوم هو مفهوم خاطئ. الأقلية لا علاقة لها بالحقوق. الأمم المتحدة حسنا فعلت عندما نشرت تقريرا بتقرير حول المناطق المتنازع عليها، في تقرير طويل جدا في فصلين. الفصل الأول يتناول كل المناطق المتنازع عليها، والفصل الثاني يختص بكركوك، وفيه فرص كثيرة ممكن الاعتماد عليها، ولكن أنا أعتمد من هذا التقرير مبدئين أساسيين. المبدأ الأول هو أنه يقول أن الاستفتاء حول المناطق المتنازع عليها وخاصة في كركوك يجب أن يسبقه حوار، ويقسم الاستفتاء في دول العالم حول المناطق إلى استفتاءين: استفتاء تأكيدي واستفتاء عدائي. ويفسر الاستفتاء التأكيدي بأنه ذلك النوع من الاستفتاء الذي يسبقه حوار واتفاق بين الأطراف ثم نذهب إلى استفتاء. أما الاستفتاء العدائي فهو الاستفتاء الذي يعتمد على 50+1، وبالتالي يخلق عداوات بين الخاسر والرابح من هذا الاستفتاء. المهم كيف سنخرج جميعا رابحين من أي عملية استفتاء تجري في كركوك أو المناطق المتنازع عليها. النقطة المهمة الأخرى، أنا فقط لأجل تلطيف الجو، كنا قلقين جدا قبل أن ينشر السيد دي مستورا عندما كان ممثل اليونامي في العراق، كنا قلقين جدا حول طبيعة هذا التقرير الذي سينشر، وهل سيكون لصالح التركمان أم لصالح الكرد أم لصالح العرب. ففي جلسة حوار خاصة مع دي مستورا قال اطمئن، إن تقريرنا لن يحقق حلم طرف واحد من الأطراف الموجودة في كركوك. فهو إن لم يكن يحقق حلم طرف من الأطراف، فيستدعي هذا منا جميعا العمل لخلق رؤية مشتركة بيننا جميعا، خاصة ونحن اليوم نعيش واقع بعد 10/6 الذي ألقت بتبعات وظلال وخيمة جدا على المناطق المتنازع عليها. عصابات داعش مع الأسف الشديد مارست سياسة تغيير ديموغرافي لم تشهد لها المنطقة مثيلا. هناك أكثر من 250 إلى 400 ألف تركماني تركوا بيوتهم، بدءا من تل عفر إلى طوس إلى ينججة إلى بوسطاملي إلى قرتبة. هناك الكرد اليزيديين الذين تركوا سنجار وزمار، وهناك المسيحيين الذين اضطروا إلى ترك مساكنهم في الموصل. كم من هؤلاء سنتمكن من إرجاعهم مرة أخرى إلى أراضيهم؟ لأننا تعودنا أن الذي يترك مكانه الأصلي في العراق لا يجد الحافز والدافع للرجوع مجددا إلى مكانه الأصلي، ويبقى في مكان آخر غير هذا المكان الذي انتقل عليه. هذا التحدي الكبير يفرض علينا جميعا أن نتوحد، وأن لا ينفرد طرف واحد في اتخاذ قرار، سواء ما يتعلق بواقع هذه المناطق المتنازع عليها أو مستقبلها. شكرا جزيلا. Thank you. Thank you.
And the rest of the disputed territories. Moving on actually to issues related to trust building measures and to a need for dialogue. Please, sir, Dr. Ali, if you want to go on.
I will start where Dr. Ihsan ended. Dr. Ihsan was one of our partners on our work as United Nations in the disputed territory. If we succeeded to tackle or settle part of the disputed territories or the disputed internal boundary, like some other likes to say it, we would not have ISL now in Mosul. That's for sure. If we succeeded, as we have succeeded in some areas, together with our partners, we will have different Iraq today. I mean, unfortunately, that didn't happen. Not only that, some other issues, if it was happened and tackled in a proper and a comprehensive manner, Iraq would be one of the leading regional country today. I mean, the whole disputed area is started, as also Dr. Hassan and other colleagues mentioned, with disputed on the term itself, whether it could be disputed area, how the UN should be involved, is the international community, which will be an international issue while we are talking, that's an internal issue. We started with that like it's a nightmare for all of us as individuals. Well, what the Kurds will say, what the Sunni will say. I'll be blunt, I'm not going to use the diplomatic terms. The reality is hidden somewhere. Well, what the Kurds will say on this, what the Sunni will say on this, because the disputed territory mainly, if we are limited it to the origin part of it, it's between the Sunnis and the Kurds, mainly. Then what the Kurds will say, what the Sunni will say, what the Shia would say, what if each one's interest. Our major problem is to start to convince the parties that it needs to be tackled. It's an urgent issue. In your committees and the committees, as Dr. Mohammed have mentioned, failed to tackle the issue, and it's necessary. It cannot build a new political democratic regime while there are issues need to be settled. Iraq is entering a new era of democracy, coexistence, power sharing. It has to continue to solve the problem. We succeeded somehow to do what I call and others call the research. We were descriptive. We didn't say, who is for who. At least we described the communities. We described the grievances, all the history of these areas, what the former regime has done, how many people, according to what available information, were deprived from their homes, the properties were taken. All of this, we put it together and on the whole, each district and sub-district area. That to be the basis of negotiation among the parties. First of all, everybody got suspicious. Everybody said, it's sometimes we are oriented by the Kurds, sometimes we are oriented by the Shia, sometimes we are oriented by the Sunni. But thank God we succeeded to put it in paper. And it was accepted. We are back with all parties at that time to be the Prime Minister, the Vice President who was Tariq al-Hashimi at that time, and the President who was Imam Jalal. God gave him more health. I mean, these are three people, as three components we worked. We got some feedback from some KRG, but we didn't get any feedback from others, but it was okay. We established at that time what's called High Committee to discuss the way forward about it, which is the usual mediation and dialogue issue. It was well represented, and we have Dr. Mohammed Hassan as the Minister of the Disputed Territory, which is the senior official in KRG government, and we have the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq at that time, Dr. Raush, and we have the Deputy Prime Minister, that second Deputy Prime Minister, Dr. Isawi. And we have a senior advisor who will represent the Prime Minister in the committee itself. We worked well. We developed a little bit of progress. We agreed that we have to start with confidence building measures because it's a big file. We have a little bit to separate it and start at least to show some trust among the parties. It was not easy. Dr. Mohammed Hassan witnessed that. It's not easy. It's not easy to get the parties together sometimes. However, it didn't work on the fair until the provincial elections took place. When Hadba, which was, I'm not revealing secrets, were anti-Kurds at that time in Mosul. But because we decided to go step by step on the confidence building measure, we worked on two tracks. One is try from Nainawa to basically to solve some problem on the ground to win the confidence of the people there, and on the other side in Kirkuk to work on the property issue, as it's been mentioned, no progress was. In Nainawa, we have succeeded to, at that time, to bring the governor of Nainawa, Athir al-Nujafi Tarbir, about some detainees and other practical issue has to do with the relation between KRG and Nainawa. From that day, I think this is one of the success of dialogue. Athir al-Nujafi is almost most of his time before ISL was here. We succeeded in certain area, but then the election started, the campaign of the election, the national election of 2010 started. Then people, of course, during the election time, raised their demands and standards for electoral purposes, which is one of the problems that Iraq, like some other areas in this part, has. And then the new government was established. It took 7 months. With the new government, again, we revived the committee. By that time, Mr. de Mistura has gone, and we got a new SRG to continue. Unfortunately, we had only a couple of meetings. And most of the time, a quick meeting, we could not. There was no political will. At that time, from certain partners, I'm not going to specify, everybody knows, but there was no political will to tackle this issue. for political reason, for political internal reason, which unfortunately this is one of the problems is to make Iraq hostage to your political, sort of a small political campaign. This is a trend which I can see it today. Now, disputed territories is, I think, it's a result of basically lack of power sharing in the country, lack of revenue, the law of revenue sharing, and lack of, oil and gas is not there, and the balance within the whole system of the country now. Parties feel marginalized, and parties feel see others are taking over basically more of the authorities of the country. As a dialogue, as a UN experience, on that time it was our first engagement with the components, we like to call it components of Iraq. As I confess, we succeeded and we failed. We succeeded when a dialogue, a genuine dialogue started, when a will on the ground was there. When the people of Nineveh wanted to solve their problem and KRG was willing to solve the problem, we reached solution. I'm not revealing secrets. I got the 3 officers of Asayish, of Udhok, Arbil and Sulaymaniyah to Mosul at that time. And they went, senior, basically, security officers to go, that's a will. The same thing we got Athir al-Nujafi to Arbil the first time. It was a nightmare to get Athir al-Nujafi to cross all the way to Arbil, but there was somehow a will. And we solved the whole detainees issue and some other issue, they were solved. What I want to say, are almost on the same problem. Now we have ISL taking some of the areas. Before ISL, there was the whole demonstrations in some of in 6 governorates or 5 governorates. We tried, we engaged, we got into stages where we almost there, but it didn't work. At the same time, we hope this government will be different by really and seriously engage where they have to make compromise. The whole centralism in Iraq is not working. It didn't work and it's not going to work. You have to have an acceptable type of federalism where people guaranteed their rights. Rights of Iraqis shouldn't be different from the south, or from the north, and from the center or the west. This is where people are suspicious. That's why where space was found, huge space found, and Daesh or ISL just came and occupied it. That's why it was easy, because it was a space. Nobody cared. People not interested. People are not interested because they don't feel that their rights are guaranteed. Their life is in safe hand. They got frustrated because there is no power sharing, no genuine power sharing. They feel isolated. That's why it was easy for ISL to do whatever they are doing now. Now we are trying again to revive basically the mechanism of the disputed area, which was functioning. But now we hope with this challenge in Iraq, I'm not talking about the region, in Iraq, the will which was absent at that time will be created by the different parties, and we will be able to engage with the different parties to have the proper compromise to get again Iraq back together with everybody feel that his right or her rights are guaranteed. And I don't want to go beyond that. I don't want to take much of your time. And I hope, this forum will come up with some recommendation could help the Iraqis and the international community to address the Iraqi issue. Thank you very much.
Marwan, thank you. You made actually a very interesting point on the failure of power sharing and the lack of political will that has been the source of many problems in Iraq, and mainly on the issues of negotiation of the disputed territory, something that is echoing what Mohammed mentioned. And I will come back to this a little bit later. We'll just move on to Gareth, who will talk now in the PowerPoint presentation.
trying to make this work, and I'm not succeeding. There we go. Okay, I would like to express my thanks to Professor Dilara Al-Dean and the organising committee for inviting me to speak at what is a fantastic inaugural event for a much-needed think tank in the Kurdistan region. And there can be few subjects as important as understanding the future of the disputed territories. My own background with Kurdistan goes back to 1996, a very different place, a very, very different time. And it's one that is useful to reflect upon. The changes in Kurdistan over the last 18 years have been remarkable. I'm sure the changes over the next 18 or 20 years will be even more so. And in that time frame, we would expect to see something happen in the disputed territories and in the Kurdistan region going forward. And so it's a very pertinent subject to be focusing upon today. I'm going to focus upon the very recent past, the period of June onwards, and then reflecting upon some of the theoretical and practical considerations that have been forwarded by different articles of the Constitution, by UNAMI, for the resolution of the disputed territories, and some of the problems that now, or some of the changes that now come forward from the rise of ISIS and what that means. We've heard many things over the last few months, different ways of describing the situation that Iraq, the Kurdistan, that the disputed territories are now in, usually a before and after Mosul type of discussion. And that's a very apt place to start. If we consider the disputed territories before Mosul, so April, May into June 2014, the situation was not only unresolved, it seems to me that it was almost forgotten. The situation of the disputed territories, of the peoples in the disputed territories, of the status of Kirkuk, had largely been put to one side, it seems, as an outsider watching this, as Erbil and Baghdad struggled over questions such as oil, such as the budget, such as the status of Erbil within Iraq. And so it was largely unresolved. There was, of course, the Baghdad-Erbil standoff. If we remember back to May and April 2014, the rhetoric between those two capitals was intense and non-stop. At times, watching from London, it seemed to me and others in that sort of position that Erbil and Baghdad could quite easily go to war in the disputed territories, let alone resolve the problem of them. The KRG and the different Kurdish parties had established de facto control over key parts of the disputed territories. That seemed to be very clear. But the territories themselves had been caught in a geopolitical trap between Baghdad, between Erbil, not quite a political football, but not far from it either. Just to remind everybody where we are, this is a very useful map for referring to later, showing the Kurdistan region as it was approbated in the Constitution of 2005, and the disputed territories. Later on, we'll show a map that raises the question not of what to do with the disputed territories, but what exactly are the disputed territories in today's Iraq. So we move to the during Mosul phase, and for me this is between the rise of ISIS in Mosul, their swift attack that captured the city in June, through to the attack on Kurdistan in August. This was a crazy time, not that long ago, but a crazy time in Iraq, a crazy time in Kurdistan, as everybody looked south from Erbil, trying to figure out what Caliph, or Abu Bakr as he was known then, later Caliph Ibrahim would do, trying to understand the response of Maliki in Baghdad, and looking to see how the Kurds were going to consolidate their hold over those parts of the disputed territories they took. The disputed territories became a theatre of war. Again, the question of resolution was not there. How could it be? We witnessed the genocide of the minorities, of the Yazidis, of the pushing out of the Christians, of the targeting of a whole range of groups and peoples in these areas. The Peshmerga, thankfully, were pushed into key parts of the disputed territories, especially around Kirkuk. Otherwise, I think it would have been all too easy for ISIS forces, as they were, to have steamrolled for even further to the east and to the north. But it changed matters hugely for the Kurdistan region. Rather than having this disparate area of the disputed territories where Peshmerga were being deployed here and there, where security forces were projecting their power, there was now a line, there was now a boundary, a 1,050-kilometer boundary that desperately needed to be defended. In this setting, I would argue that the KRG, maybe the leadership, was overconfident, and they had good reason to be. The vaunted forces of the Iraqi security forces of Maliki had been shown to be weak, disparate, chaotic, unable to defend even against a few thousand ISIS fighters. how could they then fight against the Peshmerga if Kurdistan was to succeed? There wasn't really a view of the threat that ISIS posed to the Kurdistan region itself, or the fact that ISIS could have far more durability and longevity than it has shown to have. For ISIS itself, I think it remained fearful of a northern threat, of a threat that could come from the Kurds if they decided to push against them at this key moment of weakness for them as they had extended their hold in the north. And I think they were watching for political signals of a rapprochement between Baghdad and Erbil that would place them in a very difficult position, or even a coming together of the Kurds with key Sunni Arab tribes, which would be a cause for war for ISIS as we saw. So this is the front line as of 21st of July. I'm sure it's changed a bit since then. I did have this map with permission of the Peshmerga ministry before I'm arrested, and they're quite aware that I've been using it. But it shows a very different line to what was constitutionally agreed in 2005, a much longer line, and interestingly, it cuts right across the disputed territories. So now when we start to talk about them, certainly from a Kurdish perspective, and I guess from Baghdad as well, it's not where are the disputed territories, it's what are the disputed territories? What is Kirkuk today? It is not the Kirkuk that was being discussed previously. It is a very different entity without the districts, the Arab districts of Hawija, of Abbasi, of Zab, of other places. So we go to after Mosul and the attack on Kurdistan and the attacks across the disputed territories. ISIS launched a multiple front attack known as four-dimensional warfare, coming at the Peshmerga from many different sides. And quite simply, Peshmerga forces, brave and courageous though they were overwhelmed by what was a concerted push by ISIS at this time. But it did result in an alignment and a sudden recognition, as it were, in Western capitals of the importance of the survival of the Kurdistan region, arguably of the success of the Kurdistan region going forward in the face of the ISIS threat. And if you really wanted to hold Iraq together, the Kurds shouldn't be seen as the agents of Iraq's demise, but arguably the bedrock on which it would be built. And so there was an 11th hour defense in Mahmoud, in Guer, aircraft in the skies, the Peshmerga reorganized, re-equipped later on, and pushed back ISIS. But it was a near-death experience. But arguably it was a near-death experience that could see Kurdistan come out of this situation even stronger, well aware of the problems that it now faces on the southern boundary with the Islamic State, well aware of the sensitivities, as we have heard from Marwan Ali, of not getting the disputed territories right, and well aware of the fact that the future could actually be quite bleak, as well as possibly being very rosy indeed. But it has come at a cost as well. Kurdistan's survival limits, to a degree, I would argue, the ability of the Kurdistan region to fully self-determine its own future, now that its interests are more aligned with international interests going forward. Moving quickly to the practical and theoretical questions of governing Kirkuk, or governing Kirkuk in the disputed territories. I had the honor of serving as a senior advisor to Stefan de Mistura in the writing of the UNAMI document of 2009. It's not necessarily a document that I fully agree with, but that wasn't my job as an advisor. But it did provide a very useful understanding of the landscape, the political and social landscape of the disputed territories, which is essential for understanding how to move forward. It also presented not necessarily plans, but ways and examples of how disputed territories have been managed comparatively in different parts of the world, remembering that every situation is quite different, and the resolution of Kirkuk and the disputed territories will also be quite different. But various models have been projected, both in that report and in others, that Kirkuk could become a regular governorate of the Kurdistan region, that Kirkuk and other disputed territories could become self-contained regions, that there could be special status arrangements either within the government of Iraq or within the Kurdistan region. These are all possibilities. They're all probably quite bad possibilities, but it's not a question of finding a really good one, it's a question of finding the one that everybody is equally disappointed with. And in that way, I think, even though the UNAMI document was dismissed by pretty much every political party, the fact that they were all unified in its dismissal was actually quite a good starting point to get everybody at least talking about it. But the resolution of Kirkuk and the disputed territories is going to be more about the process of its resolution than the end result itself. The confidence building of the process is more important than actually finding that line at this moment. If we move to the practical considerations, the theoretical side will keep the constitutional lawyers and academics busy for many, many years, but there is a practical question here. Kirkuk is now a divided governorate. We don't talk about the same Kirkuk as it was in 2005. Even then it had been heavily divided, as we've seen in many maps of the attenuation of Kirkuk province over the years by the government of Saddam Hussein. But now it's divided. The western provinces are not part of Kirkuk, as it were, anymore. The Kurdish control side has the big Peshmerga presence there, and it is being firmly tied into the Kurdistan region going forward. It's also a threatened governorate. The ISIS forces have not gone away. Even as recently as a few weeks ago, there was an upsurge in ISIS attacks across the whole front, and especially in Dakuk, where many Peshmerga lost their lives. And there is also the threat of recalcitrant Arab tribes in that area as well that may or may not have common interests with ISIS going forward. It's also a contested governorate between Baghdad and Erbil. Of course there is the question, as we've heard previously, about oil. And would the history of Kirkuk and arguably the history of Kurdistan and Iraq be different without oil? Of course it would. But oil has to be resolved as an issue. And it seems to me there is a deal, a possible deal on the table. Accepting that Kirkuk's oil in the Havana and the Baba domes, not in the Khommala dome, belongs to the governorate of Iraq, that government is unable to get that oil out. It cannot take it to Beji. It cannot take it anywhere else. If Kirkuk's oil is going to flow as it should, then it has to go through the Kurdistan-controlled pipeline to the Khommala facility and out through Ceyhan. That seems to me a clear possible deal going forward. And it's in these areas of clear, practical deals that are perhaps possible for politicians to achieve that the future of Kirkuk will be found. I have to say that I'm reasonably pessimistic about any of this coming to pass. The question of the threat of ISIS is absolutely huge, and in some ways a discussion about the future of the disputed territories, the future of Kirkuk, is caught now in a catch-22 situation. There will be no resolution of the threat of the Islamic State without a resolution of the problem of the disputed territories, but there will be no resolution to the problem of the disputed territories without the removal of the Islamic State. And it's at that particular catch-22 that brings the status of the disputed territories, this whole issue, into the international domain. And it's one I would think will become more obvious as the months and years roll on, that the resolution of the disputed territories will be as important to Western capitals, other capitals as well, as it is to Erbil and Baghdad and Kirkuk and Mosul themselves. Thank you.
Yes, I just want to ask two questions. The first one will be for Marwan and Mohammed. You have spoken, as I mentioned earlier on, about the issues of power sharing and the lack of political will from Baghdad, and how this has halted the process between Erbil and Baghdad on the issues of the disputed territories. Today the government has changed in Baghdad post-elections. The situation, the security on the ground has also altered the dynamic and the balance of power. Do you have any hope, or do you foresee any resolution in the near future? Would you conceive also that Article 140 is still a viable solution, and what time frame would you give it?
First of all, I don't agree and I don't accept and don't believe in any time frame coming out from Baghdad. Because most of the Iraqis, they are wearing their watch as part of their just they share it. They don't calculate the time well. This is Iraqi culture. Timing, I never ever believed that one of any deadlines can be met which has come from Baghdad, really. Regarding power sharing, I think no matter what will happen, if we are 99% in any area, we as a Kurd, we have to think of a power sharing, and we have to play the game of win-win game, no matter we are majority or minority. Not like, because that's not part of our culture. We know what it means to behave as a majority. This is fact, and it was clear through the last 10 years, the areas where we were highly majority, we managed in a way that at least we reduce the criticism from other minorities or other people who are sharing lands with us, really. But with the current government, really, I know most of the players, I think most of the figures, they know them well. I hope, personally, they can get advantage from the mistakes committed before. First of all, either they are ready to acknowledge it or not. It's part of Iraqi cultures. We have to go back to sociology before coming to politics. I think in this culture, most of our brothers and partners in Baghdad, they don't have the culture of accepting their mistakes. We so far lost billions of dollars. Huge amount of people, roughly about 40% of Iraq's land in today is under the occupation of Daesh. The most Iraq, they've been occupied by the West weapon, top sophisticated. We never ever managed to defend a small village, okay? Which means there was something behind it. We have to acknowledge our failure. They have to acknowledge current Prime Minister is ready to accept or to acknowledge that his successor was a failure, 8 years of damage or not. Even political parties, including Kurds and Turkmen as well, we are ready to confront them and tell him that, guy, you are the source of the failure for the last 8 years. You are the source of spending billions of Iraqi dollars for nothing. If we have that courage to go ahead and to discuss our issues frankly, not just shaking hands and taking part or saying goodbye or taking chairs, there is chances to implement it and going ahead. But at the same time, I am confirmed, if we are not going to sort out this issue, I am purely sure that there will be no Iraq, and we are going to enter another serious war in the area, more dangerous than Daesh. This is my personal point of view. I hope I am wrong, but this is my perspective for the future, really.
I have to be optimistic because, I mean, the whole integrity of Iraq, or not only Iraq, of the region, is on stake. I mean, really, what could happen in Iraq? You know, unless a miracle, that will mess up the region. Even Syria, with the whole image that is taking, is not going to influence the region as much as Iraq will influence. Now, I have some hope that the style of tackling the issue change. And I hear some voices. I said I have to be optimistic. Don't take it as, I see some voices changing language, changing tactics. There are issues as a United Nations we couldn't work on before. Now at least somehow we started to work on. You know, I mean, Iraq is, everybody knows, I mean, maybe KRG is different. KRG have developed experience a long time ago, and then they are in a different sort of political vision. They more know what is exactly, what do they want, what their options. Others, they don't have. They have to find a vision. I mean, to be more blunt, I mean, the Kurds know what are the options. KRG, I don't want to use the Kurds. KRG knows what are the options that they have. If this happened, this happened, if this happened. But also, the Sunnis need to know what is it they want from Iraq. What is it? What is the vision? I have to be blunt on this. The same thing with the Shia, who are considered the majority, how they want to keep Iraq together in a partnership. It's not like, you know, we need Marwan to work with me or Marwan has to work with Mohammed. No, Marwan and Mohammed as partner. You see, that's the mentality which needs to exist now. After the threat which is going to take you know, everybody. Everybody. ISIL is a threat of everybody, and the division of Iraq will reach Saudi Arabia. The Iraq integrity is important. And the good thing which make me somehow optimistic that there is no dispute about Iraq on the regional dimension and in the international dimension. You know how much, you know, the whole fighting ISIL got an international support. And the big players in the region also, they have no interest of Iraq division because the division will reach them, not because something else. That's where Iraq have a chance. And of the Iraqi politicians, just throw the dress of before 2014, I don't want to go back, but just before 2014, with the new election, with the new government, with the most inclusive government. I mean, if we are talking about technically speaking, it's an inclusive government, okay, with the 3 vice presidents who used to be speakers and presidents and prime ministers. It never happened in history. That could help Iraq to overcome, and the disputed territory is one. I mean, in my point of view, as somehow who worked on this arena here and somewhere else, 2 issues need to be settled. The disputed territories and the reconciliation with the Sunnah. If these 2 issues happen, I think Iraq will be different. It will solve the oil and gas and the revenue sharing and the power sharing and all of these issues which is really stumbling and creating the problems will be solved. If the government, the current government will be able to tackle these 2 issues, I think we will be in the region in general in much better situation. Thank you.
Just ask one last final question to our panelists, moving on to a question to the public. Doctor, you mentioned actually the process of Arabization and the impact that Arabization and normalization had on the fabric of Kirkuk. You've also mentioned the security situation and how it's affecting the tipping balance of power in the disputed territories. I would like to just focus on Kirkuk. As you know, recently KRG opened an office recently in Kirkuk. Do you think this is an attempt to formalize the definition of Kirkuk getting a special statute inside of KRG? Or would you see this as a means to open dialogue and to build confidence building measures in Kirkuk among the different communities? If you can both comment on this.
أنا أعتقد أن الوضع الآن في كركوك وخاصة الأمني معقد، حيث لا زالت لدينا 6 أقضية ونواحي بيد عصابات داعش، ولم تتمكن الحكومة لحد الآن من استعادة هذه الأراضي. وبقاء هذه العصابات بيد داعش أنا من وجهة نظري هو مصدر خطر وتهديد على كركوك. عندما جاء الجيش الأمريكي وكان متواجدا في كركوك وحدثت اضطرابات في تلك المناطق الآن التي هي موجودة بيد داعش، كان للأمريكان أنا من وجهة نظري نظرة ثاقبة، حيث قالوا لا يمكن حفظ أمن كركوك إلا باستقرار تلك المناطق. فبدأت تجربة الصحوات عام 2007 و2008، وبعد أن استقرت تلك المناطق استقر داخل كركوك. وأنا أقول الآن يجب أن نعمل بنفس النظرية، وهي نظرية صحيحة. يجب أن نستعيد تلك المناطق من يد هذه العصابات وإرجاعها مرة أخرى إلى تحت سيطرة القوات الحكومية. وهذا يستوجب أيضا من وجهة نظري أن تكون هناك قوات كركوكية تشارك فيها كل المكونات لتحرير هذه المناطق. هذه حلقة يجب التركيز عليها، ونحن كتركمان دعونا في مرات سابقة عديدة أن يكون لكركوك خصوصية حتى في بناء الجيش، وأن لا يستخدم إليها جيش من خارجها، وأن يكون هناك قوات تابعة لوزارة الدفاع ولكن من أبناء كركوك أنفسهم. أنا أعتقد هذه أحد فرص الحل في هذه المحافظة. الأمن في كركوك مرتبط جزء منه بالحل السياسي. إذا كانت هناك بيئة أمنية مستقرة ممكن أن نجري حوارات، وعن طريق هذه الحوارات نتقدم بالحل. ولا بأس أن تتولى مؤسسة مثل مؤسسة الشرق الأوسط في أن تجمع الأطراف الكركوكية إلى مائدة حوار مفتوحة يكون فيها عصف ذهني، ويكون هناك طرح لكل الأفكار الموجودة لأجل الوصول إلى صيغة مشتركة.
In terms of the move of the KRG and the KNA to establish offices there, it seems to me an entirely reasonable thing to do. Kirkuk has for too long fallen between two governmental and administrative stools, and now at least Erbil is showing that interest and willing going forward. Of course, there may be ulterior motives there. Facts on the ground are then increasingly difficult to pull back afterwards, but I think at this moment in time, that sort of presence is probably a good thing. Moving forward, the whole issue of how special status arrangements are then put together, it's not the sort of thing that can simply be done by one of the actors in this game. If it is to be a special status arrangement within the Kurdistan region that is part of the Federal Republic of Iraq, then that is going to take intense negotiations, probably within the framework of the Constitution and a reinvigorated Article 140. And similarly, if there is to be a special status for Kirkuk as a region or as part of the government of Iraq, it would still be needed to be a negotiated settlement going forward. So I think and I'm sure that the leadership of the KRG understands that. So I think we can perhaps back away from looking at ulterior motives and perhaps see some altruistic ones at this point for a place that is in desperately needed governance and administration. I think, though, there is a bigger problem going forward, and it's something that we've been skirting around here, and it is this presence of ISIS in the disputed territories. And we can talk about all of these arrangements very happily, but there is a big, big elephant in the room, as it were, and that is the Islamic State. And even if a multi-ethnic force, if we call it that, emerges from Kirkuk to liberate Hawija, it's not confronting the fact that the only way, arguably, to defeat the Islamic State is with a Sunni Arab army, and that simply does not exist. And if it is to exist, it would need to be created, and that is where the international community's gaze, I think, is going to go in the future, towards far more invasive, interventionist methods of undermining the Islamic State, both in Iraq, in the north, and in Syria going forward, rather than tinkering around the edges in the hope that Kirkuk is secure.
Thank you very much. Now we will turn to the public for questions. I will ask